that thank you. Recording is starting. I was just going to mention that there's going to be a recording of the presentation today to share with participants who are unable to join us. So welcome everyone, a particularly bright and cold day here in Guelph after some lovely warm weather. And I'm Professor Helen Hambley. I'm the Program Coordinator of Capacity Development and Extension. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all today to a shared event with Circle here at the University of Guelph, which I'll explain in a moment on behalf of its director, Sharda Srivanathan. So just one moment that I'll come back to Circle. But before getting started, it is our tradition and our expectation here at the University of Guelph to recognize the land on which we all live, learn, and work. This is land held by the ancestral and Indigenous peoples of the Guelph area. These are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who have actively maintained and strengthened their relationship with the land on which our university is grounded, but also grounded in the respect, reciprocity, and resiliency of those Indigenous peoples. Our land acknowledgement is really an act of voicing this respect and recognizing that land is sacred to Indigenous peoples. Here at the University of Guelph, we're very pleased to be able to have an opportunity to share our learning within this environment. And we recognize the dish with one spoon, an agreement of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and other allied nations from the area that we now know as the Great Lakes region of Ontario. We all eat together from the one dish, and we recognize that the Creator has provided us with an opportunity to share resources here. And with this acknowledgement and recognition of the Jake Thomas Learning Center that provided this land acknowledgement support, I would like to open the meeting and recognize that we're all here to live, learn, and respect from one another. So those are the general rules of the webinar today. And I certainly accept any mistakes and errors in the land acknowledgement and in anything that happens today. And I'm also open to any feedback and reactions to today's presentation. So feel free that it's an open door, and we are so very lucky in this webinar today that we're joined across the Atlantic Ocean from colleagues in Reading, UK. This event is possible out of a collaboration between the UK and University of Guelph here in Canada. But it's also possible because here at the University of Guelph, we have a very dynamic center called Circle. Circle is the Canada-India Research Center for Learning and Engagement. It was started in February 2022 to be an interdisciplinary nucleus in Canada for cutting-edge research on India, South Asia, and diasporic communities to showcase, advocate, catalyze, and foster an equitable, respectful, and sustained exchange of knowledge between Canadian and Indian scholars on the complex and emerging and sometimes unexplored topics related to sustainability, social and economic well-being. And I invite everyone to check out the Circle the website, its upcoming events and all of its activities, and continue to strengthen and support this unique center here at the University of Guelph. So today's seminar, the format of it is we're going to have some opening words from Dr. Henny Osbar from University of Reading. He'll explain this unique partnership this year between University of Guelph and University of Reading. And then we'll move to the presentation by our guest speaker. Certainly Dr. Mondira Bhattacharya is perhaps known to some of you already who have read some of her papers, but a fascinating case study on the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, known as MGNREGA. REGA. Terrible acronym, Mondira, but you're going to explain why India's Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act is so important as a case study, and we're all looking forward to that learning today. Following the presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A, and then also any follow-up questions and suggestions for further webinars. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Henny Osbar to say a few words of welcome from Reading, England.
Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be joining you with this webinar. So I'm a professor in international development and head of department for the Department for International Development. We are based in the University of Reading in the UK, just outside London, and we're part of the School of Agriculture Policy and Development. And as Helen mentioned, we have an MOU with between the University of Guelph and Reading. And one of the things that has sort of transpired from that is this shared project, which is funded through the Erasmus scheme through the EU. And it's facilitated a lot of staff mobility opportunities for us to share and learn, particularly around potential future partnerships, but also in terms of our shared teaching and potential online shared delivery that we'll be doing from 2024. So we're very excited about that, but also we recently, myself and a colleague, Dr. Sarah Cardy, who is a specialist in gender and communication for rural development, we came to the University of Guelph in order to conduct this sort of visit and a chance to meet with Atta and Helen. But also the conference was going on, the AIAEE conference. And so through that, there was an opportunity for a number of colleagues to share research ideas and collaborations. Mondira, a colleague who I work with, was unfortunately unable to come with us, which was the intention, and in fact to kind of be part of all of that. And she was going to be giving this presentation during that visit. So as she wasn't able to travel, Helen and the colleagues circle, we're very grateful for this opportunity, really, to, in the spirit of the Erasmus programme, to have an opportunity to hear about Mondira's research interests and be able to perhaps get some feedback on that. So yes, this is very much in that spirit of shared learning, and we're delighted at the University of Reading to be able to be part of this webinar with you this morning there, this afternoon over here, and I can tell you it's lovely and sunny here in Reading. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henny. It's a real pleasure to have you here. We're sorry that Sarah Cardy can't join us. For those of you who are not aware, Sarah Cardy is a graduate of our Masters of Science in Capacity Development and Extension here at University of Guelph, and then went on to University of Reading as a PhD student, and now is a faculty at Reading University. So it's a real pleasure to have that connection to our alumni. And it's really through Henny and Sarah that I was able to meet Mondira. And Mondira, it was such a pleasure to meet you in February in person with Dr. Chowdhury, and to also
$85 per day. Huh? $85. Yeah, but 5 is for $15.
Sorry, just reminding people to mute it was a real pleasure to be able to meet you in person. So today it's virtual, and I'll pass over the talking stick to you and welcome your presentation. Welcome, Mondira. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Henny, first of all, for the introduction, and Helen, Professor Helen and Professor Sharda, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of presenting this proposal to all of you at Circle. And the idea behind this presentation is basically to get your feedback, your insights to how to better this proposal, and also to explore potentials for any collaborative work on this. So with this, I begin the presentation. So the research proposal is on how does asset selection in public works program influence livelihoods, the case of India's Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Okay, so, right, sorry. So public works programs, they're also called workfare programs, and they have been in operation in developing countries for several decades. They constitute an important subset of social protection initiatives in developing countries. Public work programs are basically government initiatives designed to create employment opportunities and stimulate economic activity in a particular region. They generate employment at lower wages to needy workers. They also create durable community assets through labor-intensive projects. And most importantly, they provide a safety net which is required for income and consumption smoothing during shocks, such as economic crisis, natural disasters, conflicts, and seasonal variations in demand. Now, since the turn of the millennium, apart from India, several countries have implemented workfare programs extensively to address high unemployment rates. So there are programs, these large programs like the Plan Jefes program of Argentina in 2001, the expanded public works program of South Africa in 2003, the productive safety net program of Ethiopia in 2005. And also there are several small programs. Some of them are the Rwandan Vision 2020 program of 2008, the 100-day employment generation program of Bangladesh in 2009, then the Food for Work program in Karnali in Nepal. Now, coming to the history of public work programs in India, India has had a very long history of employment guarantee programs to protect against food shortages, natural calamities, and famines. Now, post-independence, there have been several programs, small programs like, rural manpower scheme or crash scheme for rural employment. They got merged into bigger programs later on, such as the National Food for Work program. Again, there were, several other small programs like Rural Landless Employment Guarantee or Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, which once again got merged into larger programs called Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana, etc. So on and so forth. So it definitely has a very long history of large-scale public works programs. Now, coming to the genesis of MGNREGA. Now, in 1972, the Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme was launched as a result of a grassroots socio-political movement during the 1970-1973 drought. Now, this program, which was limited to this particular state of Maharashtra, it gave a guarantee of work, and this was enacted in 1977. Now, in the 1990s and the early 2000s, India was experiencing a fast rate of economic growth, but at the same time, it did not have equivalent or commensurate growth in employment. So there was this period was known as a period of jobless growth in India. And due to this, taking cue from this jobless growth situation, as well as this, Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme, which was giving a legal right to employment, these two, they resulted in the enactment of the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in 2005. Now, in 2005, it was implemented in about 200 districts of India. And then in 2008, all the districts of India came under the purview of this act, and the name changed to Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, this is a unique rights-based and the world's largest demand-driven guarantee program with an annual outlay of about $7.3 billion US, covering around 54 million rural households every year. Now, what are the salient features of this act? It basically provides at least 100 days of guaranteed wage employment in every financial year to every rural household whose adult members volunteer to do unskilled manual work. Second thing is that it creates durable community assets in rural areas, which has its, a resultant multiplier effect on the economy. And the third point is that it targets some of these assets basically private assets towards the most deprived sections of the rural population as per a certain list, that a list of beneficiaries, which is called the para 5 of schedule 1 of the act, that has got a list of vulnerable communities who are supposed to be given some private assets. Now, what are the community assets under MGNREGA? There are 3 types of permissible works under community assets. The category A works are natural resource management works. Category C works are development of livelihoods. Category D works are works related to rural infrastructure. Now, some of the prominent activities which are undertaken under community projects are, water conservation, water harvesting, rural connectivity, land development, drinking water and sanitation, construction of granaries, playgrounds, etc. Now, these assets, as the name suggests, it's used for the whole village community. And the people who are working in these assets towards the development of these assets, or who are creating these assets, they get remuneration in the form of wages. Now, there is a second type of asset, which are called individual assets or private assets. And I'm going to be using both individual and private assets, these two terms interchangeably during my presentation. Now, MGNREGA program, it was enacted in 2005. Since 2014, the focus has shifted towards creation of more of these individual assets. These are called category B assets. These are private assets which are created on private land, especially these assets are related to agriculture and allied activities. Now, who are these vulnerable sections of the society to which these private assets are geared? These are a couple of them. There are about 10 of them: scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, nomadic tribes, denotified tribes, below poverty line families, women-headed household, physically handicapped headed households, beneficiaries of land reforms, beneficiaries of a prime minister scheme, scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers act. And it also includes after all these are completed, it includes small and marginal farmers. Now, the share of individual assets has increased from about 18.6% in 2012 to about 20% in 2014, and it has jumped to nearly 61% in 2022-23. So you can see that since 2014, there has been a massive reorientation towards these private assets under MGNREGA. Now, what is the focus of these individual assets? These are of 2 types. First is income generating assets, and the second is amenities based assets. Income generating assets are again of certain types. First is called improving agricultural productivity. These are works such as dug wells, farm ponds, water harvesting structures. Then there is the second type of asset is called development of fallow land or waste land and bringing it under cultivation. Now, both these type of assets, improving agricultural productivity and development of fallow land, there are about 30 types of works under these. Then there is improving livelihoods through horticulture, sericulture, plantation. So all types of plantation works, there are about 7 types of works under improving livelihoods. Then there is promotion of livestock and fisheries through creation of required infrastructure. There are about 5 types of works. So amongst these 4 income generating assets, we have about 42 types of works. Now, the second type of asset is the amenities-based assets. Now, these are under convergence schemes. For example, the house construction, rural house construction under the Prime Minister Affordable Housing Scheme. So it's a convergence program. So MGNREGA with the Prime Minister Affordable Housing Scheme. Then there is individual household latrine construction under the Clean India Mission. So Clean India Mission is one program which is converged with MGNREGA to build these type of assets. So there are 2 types of works under amenities based. So total is about 44 types of individual assets. Now, coming to a brief review of literature. Now, existing studies, they have mostly focused on the effects of MGNREGA wage income. Now, wage income is coming from community assets. So studies have focused mainly on wage income of MGNREGA wage income on rural market conditions, poverty reduction, improvement in purchasing power. Implementation of MGNREGA has exerted competitive pressure on private labor market. For example, when MGNREGA wages increased, it also pushed wages in the construction sector in the peri-urban areas. Then the program led to increase in real income and household consumption expenditure. Then, there are studies which have also looked at the income and consumption expenditure of vulnerable social groups. Then there are also studies which have shown limited impact of MGNREGA on poverty reduction, mainly due to high program cost or employment rationing or corruption. These studies are also there. Then there are studies which reported reduced number of meals foregone in MGNREGA households, improvement in calorie and protein intake. Participant households could cope with drought shocks, protect nutritional status of children. Then there are a few studies, which are focused on the, on qualitative assessment of works carried out under MGNREGA, assessment of works on MGNREGA household income, agricultural productivity, environmental benefits, etc. So one of the studies I had done when I was living in India, this was a very small scale study on these individual assets with a very small sample size across 3 regions in the country. But at the global level, what is missing is the livelihood outcomes among the poor and marginalized. What is the impact of assets on the livelihood outcomes? Most of these studies, they have looked at how wage incomes have improved, reduce poverty or increase household consumption, etc. What they have not really looked into is how they have affected livelihood outcomes, livelihood strategies, and resilience among farmers, and specifically these individual assets. Now we come to the research gaps. Now, as we just saw, that the direct employment effect and wage effects of public work programs have received extensive attention in empirical literature. But the impact of public work programs on livelihood outcomes via the creation of both community and individual assets have received less attention. We need to understand that both types of assets may differ considerably in terms of their magnitude and distribution of effects, and also in terms of its equity implications. Further, how both community and individual assets support livelihood resilience in the event of a disaster has not been explored. Equity in asset creation, sustainability, and impact on farm productivity, food and nutrition, etc., needs to be analyzed. It is also important to examine whether these individual or private asset creation has led to the reduction in participation of household members as wage workers in the program, in the MGNREGA program. Now, what we need to understand over here is that unlike wage income, which has direct and short-term impact on welfare, the impact of private assets, they are expected to take a long time to emerge. Now, it has been 8 years now since there has been a reorientation towards individual assets under MGNREGA, and this period is long enough to assess their impact on livelihood outcomes. Now, based on this, the objective of this research would be to develop approaches and methods, both quantitative and qualitative, for systematic and rigorous assessment of livelihood and well-being effects achieved through different types of asset creation under MGNREGA. First and foremost is to understand the mechanism of asset allocation among beneficiaries. There are so many vulnerable groups, and we have talked about nearly 44 types of assets. So what is this mechanism of allocation among all these people, whether it is allocated to all of them or not, or what is the process of allocation of these assets? This is an important thing to understand. Then to analyze the impact of select individual and community asset on rural household livelihood outcomes and examine its interactions with livelihood strategies. To examine the equity issues in asset creation, that is, analyze how it affects the general well-being across the different vulnerable social groups that we spoke about. Even within social groups, there are different classes of people. Some may have land, some may not have land. So how it is influencing, how it is affecting the different asset classes within these social groups. Then the research will also build a gender dimension where we will see the influence of assets on the intra-household distribution of income, intra-household decision-making process as well. It can be hypothesized that there exists a positive relation between the individual asset creation, household investment, and consumption. It is hypothesized that individual asset beneficiary households have greater access to diverse food baskets compared to non-beneficiary households. Individual asset creation has led to less reliance of participant households on the MGNREGA wage employment. Now, this is a diagram of a pathway through which MGNREGA asset impacts livelihoods. Now, this a typical rural household in India will have MGNREGA assets. They'll be working under community assets and may have an individual or private asset. So when they work on community assets, that household is getting wages. If the household has got a private asset also, they have a permanent and a steady stream of benefits. But households don't depend only on MGNREGA assets. They have other sources of income as well. They also have benefits receiving from other social welfare schemes. So we have a very important public distribution system in India, where beneficiary households, they get food grains at very cheap rates. So all these sources together, they result in increase in household incomes and savings. And when household incomes and savings, they increase, they result in increasing investments, like, for example, they use better agricultural inputs. There is irrigation intensity. They get more livestock herd, for example. All this results in higher crop yields and crop diversification. They result in diversified food basket, increased availability of food, reduced vulnerability and increased resilience, and improved food security and nutritional situation. Again, now what we have to understand over here is that assets created, these assets, they do not directly increase household income. They basically provide opportunities to enhance the income indirectly through other investments. Now, the nature of impact of assets will be conditional on the extent of interaction with these other investments, the geographical context, and the socioeconomic characteristics of households. Now, based on this, how do we look at the livelihood outcomes? One of the ways could be to look at the sustainable livelihood framework, where we try to understand how MGNREGA is generating and strengthening the different livelihood assets. So the different livelihood assets, they're also called capitals. There are so many, there are different kinds of these. So we would like to see how MGNREGA is affecting the natural capital, the economic and financial capital, the human capital, the social capital, the physical capital. Now, all these capital, they pass through transforming processes and structures. What are these? These are like government and private laws, then policies, the culture. And from these emerge the different livelihood strategies. It could be agricultural intensification or extensification or livelihood diversification or migration or other sources of income. So what do these households who have the different types of assets, what kinds of capital do they have? What kind of transformative processes affect them? And what ultimately strategies they kind of I'm not giving the word. What strategies they formulate, right? And these will end up in the different livelihood outcomes. So the outcomes could be poverty reduction, increasing number of working days, well-being, and improved capabilities of people, then adaptation to climate change, sustainability of natural resources. So this is one framework of analyzing livelihood outcomes from MGNREGA assets. The other could be to look at the MGNREGA assets, influence of MGNREGA assets on each of the sustainable development goals. So how it is affecting poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and green energy, decent work, innovations, reduced inequality. So a few sustainable development goals can be taken up, and one can see the impact of asset creation, differential asset creation on these goals. Coming to the methods, now both quantitative and qualitative approaches will be followed to collect data and information from the surveys. But there are methodological challenges. The first thing is that there is lack of systematic disaggregate secondary data on assets in the public domain. By public domain, we mean the MGNREGA website. It is a website which gives comprehensive data about anything and everything related to MGNREGA, including community and individual assets. But the problem with individual assets is that data is given group-wise. So we do not have data for dug well and farm pond and bore well in each village. We have that data clubbed under improving agriculture productivity. Land leveling or farm bunding work, we have it clubbed under development of fallow lands. So those 44 kinds of works that we talked about, they are all clubbed under, bigger sections. Whereas we would have preferred to have each, village level data for each of these. That would have been easier, but that is not available. So one of the tasks would be to identify the level of discrepancy between the secondary data and the actual field observation of assets. Now, functional assets in the study region will be enlisted from the secondary data available on the MGNREGA website, which is like the group-wise data, and the presence of assets on the ground will be actually checked against the assets listed on the website. This is one task that can be done. I'll just show pictures from a previous field work that I had done on this. So, for example, these are assets for improving agricultural productivity. We have dug well, bore well, field bunding, farm pond, development of fallow land, land leveling work under development of fallow lands, then fruit orchard, it's a plantation under livelihoods. Then there are lots of, goat shelters, cattle shed, fish ponds, they come under promotion of livestock and fisheries. These are the kind of works. Now, the second issue with data is heterogeneity in individual asset creation. So there are, as we said, 44 types of assets. Now, these assets, they are not randomly assigned to people. Right? The factors that affect the intervention, the factors that affect the allocation of individual assets are likely to affect the outcome. So, for example, a person who has got land, if he gets an asset, his outcome will be different from a person who is not landed. Therefore, this non-random assignment of intervention or the asset could be a source of selection bias. So the challenge is that how much of the change in outcome that we are looking at, they can be attributed to the intervention alone, different from the effect of the other factors. How do we do that? So a strategy could be to compare the households exposed to the intervention of individual assets with households not exposed to the intervention, which is a counterfactual situation. And this is going to be a cross-sectional data, and we take single differences in mean outcomes between the beneficiary and the non-beneficiary household. So we do a with asset, without asset kind of comparison. And what are the expected outcomes? This research will provide an enhanced knowledge base on how individual assets created under public work programs build resilience among households. The research will bring about greater understanding of ability of vulnerable social groups to cope with and recover from stress and shocks. The study results will help in the formulation of region-specific policies for strengthening the asset position of vulnerable social groups. The study will evidence the role of assets under public work program and analyze the value of their sustainability, thereby making an important contribution towards the achievement of the sustainable development goals. there are some risks and suggested mitigation strategies. First is that private asset allocation is a very sensitive issue. A person, who gets the asset is very difficult to, understand, or it is very sensitive, because a person who perhaps a beneficiary, he has got, is in close proximity to a political leader. He may have got an asset, or a person, a well-off household could have got 2 assets instead of 1. So, leaving a deserving beneficiary without support. So people may be reluctant to answer such questions directly. So it would be based on a lot of observation about how these assets are selected, what is the process of this selection. Then it may be difficult to find functional assets. So the MGNREGA data, which is available in the public domain, they have got completed works. They have got an asset under completed works. Now, whether that work may be completed, but is it functional? It may be a dry dug well or dry pond, so which is not functional. So to find functional assets, one has to move around more. So it's difficult to find the functional. We would be interested in the functional assets, not the completed assets alone. And the third and the most important thing to understand over here is that, to keep in mind over here, is that the research may be perceived as, simply comparing livelihood strategies of community versus private assets, or within private assets between the different types of private assets. Yes, it is going to be a comparative study, but it will not be promoted in a way that we are kind of judging one against the other. That is not the idea. The idea is just to see the livelihood strategies, the outcomes from the different types of assets, but not to kind of give a judgment as to which asset is better. We cannot, give a statement saying if we see that the incomes or the livelihood outcomes of private assets are better than community assets. We can't say that hence private asset is better than the community asset, because community assets and private assets both are unique, both are required. So we have to take care while doing that. Similarly, within the private assets also, the comparison has to be, we have to do the comparison needs to be done carefully, because all different private assets, they are again very unique in nature. So one cannot compare a dug well to a livestock shelter. Fine. Then I have discussed this proposal with the National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, which is an apex national institution for rural development in India under the Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. And they have agreed to support this proposal. The University of Reading has recently concluded an MOU with the NIRDPR. The NIRDPR will provide facilitation for the study, especially for fieldwork, survey, establishing contact with communities, government officials, and other stakeholders, etc. So if we were to get a project on this, so there is a supporting organization. Now, I just wanted to show you some data that is available in the public domain. Now, this is actually looking at different kind of individual assets. So there's work for improving land, plantation work, infrastructure work, livestock, promotion for livestock infrastructure, and rural housing works. So across the 3 trienniums, 2016, 2019, and 2022, we see the top states for work for improving productivity of land, then the top states for plantation related works, so on and so forth. So if we were to get a project, or if we were to write a proposal, then what would be the entry point? Like, should we take one state from each of these big individual assets and do the study there? Or should we take one state which has got all of these and do a study for that? Or, we cut across the country, so north, south, east, west, take one state from each of these based on this data and do separate studies for each of the 4 or 5 regions that we select. So that is something that we can discuss. And I have given it a 3-year timeline. So the first year is like developing our FGD, the survey protocols and ethical clearance, and identifying the investigators, training field investigators, doing the initial prep work, the literature review, etc. Then the second year is entirely for the field work, the FGDs, the surveys. And the third year would be for our tabulation analysis, a large seminar or brainstorming session, then project revisions based on that and paper writing. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mondira. It's so fascinating to all of us as researchers to have this wonderful opportunity, and I can see the applause coming in now to hear about how you've built this really remarkable study. And all I can say is that there must be a future seminar after moving through this study and sharing those experiences. But at this time, you can see everyone the exciting opportunity here to share questions or reflections on this work in relation to your own work, your own interests, as well as past research we've done here at University of Guelph. So thank you so much, Mondira. I'd like to now open the floor for questions, and the process is I will look for a show of hands for anyone who has questions, and I will we'll start with questions one by one to begin. So please show me your hands up raise your hands if you have a question for Mondira. And welcome to Sarah Cardy, who has joined us as well. Just take a few minutes for everyone to formulate their questions. Maybe I could start with one, Mondira, just as we're still recording and we have this Q&A opportunity. It is about scale of your study. You explained at the top of the presentation that MGNREGA actually is supporting around 54 million households in India. And sorry?
Per year, 54 per year.
54 million per year. And so when we talk about, scaling development outcomes and scaling progress, say, towards improved livelihoods and sustainable development goals, this is really a remarkable case study. Can you talk about working at scale like this as a researcher and the challenges that you've encountered with that scaling dimension of your work?
Yeah, there are challenges, but I think it is possible to do it. I am currently working with Henny on a very large scale project on plasticulture, which is spanning 5 countries. And we have about 300 households per country. And in each of these countries, the survey areas are right across the country, not south, east, west. So we are partnering with several organizations across these countries for this project. And so far, so good. So I have the experience of working with large country on large projects. So this can be done, not a problem. And I've already spoken with NIRDPR about this. I have worked with NIRDPR before on a couple of occasions. So I think in terms of logistics and handling, this shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. And how did you, maybe just to follow up on that, how did you design your study to ensure that you can speak to scale for those 54 million households annually? You mentioned about the sampling strategy that you may have used, but what aspects of research design did you take into account in regards to that large scale of your work?
The sampling strategy is like I just showed you this table, This is giving a snapshot of the proportion of share of proportion of individual assets across each of the states over the different years. So this is giving us an idea as to which are the top states which have got the large number of assets. So we pick up one state or two states or whatever. It depends upon the kind of funding that we also get, whether we want to do something very large scale across, say, 5-6 states with around, on an average, 300 households per state, whether we want to do that or we want to, narrow down to one single state and a couple of districts in that state and do it. It all depends upon this data which is coming in. Even within the data, we have similar data for district and village level. So we can actually narrow down to those and see which are the regions which have got large number of individual as well as community assets, and pick it up from there. The sampling strategy will be based on the secondary data that we are having in the public domain.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm just reminding people that you can either come off mute and ask a question, raise your hand, or post a question in the chat. And I see that Dr. Kabir has a question. So please go ahead, Kabir.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Mondira, for this presentation. It's really huge. Like was your projects, it's a big project, I think. And it's run over, I think, more than 30 years right now. It's started before around 1970s, what I understand.
No, 2005.
Okay, 2005. So it's almost 15 years. So
2 decades.
I was wondering about your framework that you adopted in this project. So it's the FID, Sustainable Livelihood Framework. So it's also widely used in development work or projects. So it started, I think, the proposed framework 1991. So did you find this framework suitable, or you are looking for some other suitable frameworks that can also support your works? So I found some critics about these frameworks already, because this framework was developed in 1991, and over the time there are many thing changes. So how this framework actually fit your works, or do you have any plan to integrate some other components into this frameworks? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. Totally. It cannot be just the way it is given over there. That is a skeletal kind of framework, but we have to add many more things into that. For example, the gender dimension that I spoke about, how it is impacting household distribution of incomes or decision making. These are not part of that framework, but that skeletal approach is there, and we add more things inside to develop. But one is that framework. The other thing is actually just to look straight away at the Sustainable Development Goals. So we select some 7-8 goals that kind of fit into this research, this kind of research, and we look at how it is affecting in each of these Sustainable Development Goals. So it is quite open-ended. That is what I have come here to discuss with you, like which could be better to take. In my opinion, sustainable framework is great, but it is just not to be taken the way it is. Lot many new things have to be incorporated in that. And the other way is to look at simply into the SDGs. Okay,
thank you. So one maybe follow-up things. I was also thinking about, because some point I was confused about your research objective. So are you also going to look at the process of this, project? So how it actually select the participants, how it invest or provide the support to the participants. So are you also look at the mechanisms of this, projects? Or only you are going to focus on the livelihood outcome? So what's the plan?
No, both. Because you see what has happened so far, it's been nearly 2 decades since MGNREGA has been in India, and there have been scores of studies on MGNREGA, scores of them. But all of them, rather not all, I should say most of them, they have focused on the wage effects, community assets and wage effects on incomes, on poverty reduction, those kind of things. Individual assets, a project which is looking at the effects of individual assets on not only on poverty or consumption, but also resilience. These livelihood outcomes and strategies are all about resilience. What is the farmer doing to adapt to climate change, for example? So those kind of things from individual assets have not been looked into. And this project, the aim is not only to look only at individuals. So we do a counterfactual study comparing both of them, but at the same time, as I said, there are a lot of sensitive issues in this. The first thing that I mentioned was selection of assets. That is a very sensitive issue. So that has to be gauged, through observations. It's a very qualitative work over here. To go to visit the field, to talk to people generally and try and understand how people are getting these assets. Because once they get an asset, it is for life. It's supposed to be for a lifetime. Okay, then even once people get assets, they are supposed to be getting it free of cost, so to say, but more often than not, they may be paying, paying out-of-pocket payments for construction of that asset. So, for example, there's a dug well, the government gives X amount of money, and this guy, he puts in out-of-pocket payment as well. So what is the proportion of that which is going into that? So these kind of things have not been looked into at all. So it is qualitative based. It's going to be qualitative based, and these quantitative elements will come into it as well.
Can I ask one more question, Helen, because I can't see any hands?
Yes, that's quite okay, Kabir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so now I'm thinking about, as you were mentioning that you are going to look at the process as well. So I was thinking, I'm from Bangladesh, so I know one issue is very, dominant in development projects. It's about governance challenges, like corruptions, like bureaucracy and other things. So do you have any plan to look at those issues as well?
Yeah, well, see, that is why I said these are very sensitive issues. So we can't, ask very direct questions about these. But as researchers, I think we have been trained to, gauge things, to understand by talking indirectly with people, lots of focus group, in-depth key informant interviews. That kind of exchange is going to give us the answers. Another thing which I wanted to point out about the sensitivity, I did mention earlier as well. Now, when people have disposable income, say, for example, these private assets, if the income from private assets is higher compared to, say, community assets, when people have disposable income, they tend to buy food grains from the market instead of the PDS. So if we make a statement at the end saying that, okay, individual assets is resulting in higher income and therefore PDS is not really required, that would be a very, very wrong thing to say, because there are millions who are dependent on the PDS. So the inferences that we are getting out of these have to be analyzed with a lot of sensitivity. This PDS thing, and again, when people get private assets, they may not go in for community wage program. Okay, if they get private assets, they are getting relatively better off income from here, or they are getting more resilient, so they won't go in for community wage assets. So if we make a statement at the end that private asset is better than community asset and the people are moving out of community wage employment, that statement would be very insensitive to make, because community assets are very much needed. So although it is a comparative, it has to be a comparative study, because you will really not be able to understand the magnitude of effect of private asset unless you compare it with a counterfactual. But at the same time, the inferences that we derive out of it have to be analyzed very carefully.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kabir. Thank you, Mondira. There's a question in chat posted by Henny. It's actually back to everyone who's in the call. Is there any particularly interesting lens or frameworks that others might see as useful or complementary to this study? And then the other point was that this isn't not an evolution of the scheme per se, but understanding the processes and implications of the findings. That's what makes this study very novel. So Henny, have I captured those well? You've come on camera.
You've captured them perfectly, but I typed it incorrectly. It should have said evaluation.
Oh.
Yes, sorry. I think it was just a point that I wanted to mention, that it's easy to sort of look at these big high scale programs and big high scale national level analysis and sort of assume that it's just going to be able to reveal like whether the scheme is working. But I think there's something more novel there, and that is sort of really looking at, like Dr. Kabir was just saying, those processes and starting to reveal how the scheme has been working or not working for certain types of people, particularly with this sort of shift to the private assets, and whether that really does build opportunity as a result. So I think there's some really interesting implications there. That was, I think, yeah, that was the point that I was trying to make. I don't know whether, Mondira, you wanted to speak to that further.
No, that's it. I think you have summarized it quite well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Henny. Thanks very much. Great points. On the point about additional lens or frameworks in which to look at this particular study, I think as Kabir was saying, the livelihoods framework and Scone's work from the 90s, in particular the impact that had on DFID, is certainly relevant to the UK as a Reading University researcher. I mean, you're steeped well in that tradition within the DFID work, but I think it's good to look at the adaptations of sustainable livelihoods, including through a gender lens, but also through other adaptations that questioned the extent to which the development of particularly physical capital and sort of technology push, as well as technology demand models within the livelihoods literature, really have led to so-called sustainable development. And so in this regard, I think as a researcher, I'd encourage you to look at the socio-technical systems literature and other systems frameworks that have challenged say an assets or capital building type of approach used in the livelihoods frameworks, to question about whether or not simply adding assets, especially hard assets, physical assets and technologies being pushed or responding to technology demand, has really created sustainability over longer terms. So that's questioning those physical assets. So it's a nice query, because you're looking at both the community assets and the individual assets, and especially on the individual assets, things like fish ponds. These are technologies. Ultimately, these aren't just assets, these are technologies, and these are technological change processes. So it would be fascinating to see, for instance, whether or not women, for instance, had access to technological technologies and physical assets that men didn't, or vice versa, men accessing individual assets or technologies that women didn't have access to. So there's certainly in the STS world, I think, some very interesting elements. And then just finally on that, I think it's good that you track to the SDGs, because ultimately India, like Canada, like the UK, we are responsible for managing and responding to the SDGs. We've signed on to this. And I think more outcome mapping to SDGs just makes good policy sense. So from a policy perspective, this study would contribute well with that outcome mapping to the SDGs. I see Ada Rahul's hand up, so please, Ada, go ahead.
Hi, Mondira. It's great presentation. It's nice to see like more detail about what you're doing. So in relation to the discussion about the framework, I think that this framework is definitely relevant, but my understanding is that a sustainable livelihood approach, I think there are a couple of limitations, that Kabir pointed out, but one limitation is definitely looking at more macro scale, right? So it sounds to me you're looking at more cross-state kind of data, which sounded a little bit regional, development from in India. So I'm just looking at, maybe you could think about like looking at more rural sociology, kind of some framework from rural sociology. For example, there are concept of agency, actor-oriented approach, right? And power, I think it's called force field methodology that you can use, like looking at how different, power dynamics play in terms of actually utilizing individual asset, for the livelihood outcome. This is just, something came to my mind. I mean, based on my my education in Wageningen, because I just recalling, some of the discussion regarding sustainable livelihood approach. So this is just a suggestion. Maybe you can also look at more qualitative in-depth study, selecting some of the cases which is successful, some might not be, successful, and which will help to interpret your data, like more quantitative data. Yeah, I just, I just, wanted to share some of my ideas.
Thank you for the suggestion. That was the idea of this presentation, for getting to understand new approaches. Thanks, Helen, for the socio-technical approach that you spoke about, and Ataharul for the rural sociology framework. I'll definitely look up these.
Great. Thanks, Sada and Mondira. This is one of the nice opportunities where when we have a webinar like this, that we recognize like we don't always have the answers, right? This is the nice thing about research design, is that we have opportunities to explore. And I certainly would not lose the livelihoods framework. I think it's certainly an important framework to test again and again, and to look at its adaptation with some of these new elements. I think it's an exciting opportunity. And I can see some of our students are here in the room as well. And I can say that in here at Guelph, livelihoods frameworks and sustainable livelihoods framework, it's still very popular among our graduate students as a conceptual framework. There's certainly some advantages in the way that the various capitals and assets can be examined. So it still has tremendous a benefit from that. Yeah, anyone else want to come in? Questions, comments, reflections on the study? If not, I have another question for you, Mondira. You spoke about the effect of the individual assets, say for instance, and focusing on the individual assets effects, as opposed to previous work that looked at the community assets and inventorying them and the wage effects, etc. And one of the things that I would think about and I'm going to put my hat on as a gender analyst, is to ask the question about property rights. What type of contractual or contract is involved in the MGNREGA's individual assets? Who gets title to these assets? Is there a legal document, and is there a paralegal or legal capacity building so that individuals understand their rights to the assets, their ownership? And you mentioned that this could also be important because some of these individual assets might have to be maintained or improved or upgraded by the individuals over time. So what is the legal dimension, and why is that an important aspect of perhaps some of the capacity building that might be done in programs like this? Maybe it doesn't exist yet. I don't know.
Yeah, so these are, questions that have to be looked into, frankly speaking. Legal rights to land, for example, in India, legal rights to land for women is very low, especially in the northern part of India. Southern part, still relatively, women land rights are slightly better off compared to the north. So when I had done a smallish kind of exercise on individual assets a couple of years back, it was very clear that in southern India, women-headed households, they were getting some assets, but typically they have very small portion of land. But in northern India, we didn't come across any women-headed household with land. Nothing. So now the next thing is that even if women-headed households, whether at all they are getting any asset, irrespective of whether they have land or not. So southern India, for example, they got some women-headed household got livestock shelters in their homestead lands. So we didn't find any in the northern part where we had done our survey. So this is definitely an issue that needs to be studied in depth to understand what is actually coming up. We did a very small thing, but a large kind of survey will give us a clearer picture. But once these assets are given to people, then it is documented. Then it's a legal document that they have, that this asset is theirs. So that is there for sure.
That's very interesting, because that also opens up a potential piece of data. So legal agreements would have a lot of the disaggregated data that you could potentially use for analysis, and maybe
Yes.
a legal or property ownership specialist in the team is also good to. I'm not one of those, but it would be interesting. I have a question in from Shadra. She's thanking you for your presentation, Mondira, and she's asking you a question. Could you please share a bit about the caste dimensions of the impact of MGNREGA, and how have the programs affected the livelihoods of the most marginalized positions or populations, rather, including the position of Dalits, for example? Just, this may be more anecdotal rather than empirical, but if you could just reflect on the caste dimensions and then these particularly marginalized groups like the Dalit, what these programs have meant for them.
Yeah, so in the beginning, I had mentioned that there are a couple of studies which have looked at the caste dimensions of how marginalized sections of the population have benefited from the MGNREGA program. But once again, it was limited to the community assets and the wage effects from community assets, which was showed a kind of positive effect. But these individual assets, they are meant only for the vulnerable sections. So we are yet to see how it is improving their livelihoods. But at the same time, the small survey that I had done earlier, it showed that even within the vulnerable groups, there are different asset classes. So people who have better links with a political leader, the proximity to a political leader, they may be getting an asset. Or a relatively better off person, even within these vulnerable groups, they may be getting 2 assets instead of 1. Then there are marginal and small farmers, which do not come under any caste category as such, but they are supposed to get the asset when all the other different groups have been given. It's only whatever is left behind goes to them, the marginal and small farmers. But what is also seen that it is these people who do not come under any caste group as such, they get the asset, whereas the low caste person may not be getting it. So there are such kind of things that are there. But as I said, the survey, a large-scale survey, will give a clearer picture.
Yeah, very true. Very important impact of that empirical work. Thank you, Shadra, for the question, and Mondira. Anyone else? Any other questions? Comments? Some of the students in this call are designing their own studies. This might seem a little bit overwhelming, but Mondira, you've provided such a clear and insightful approach to your research design. I thought I'd like to see very much the schema, the conceptual framework visualized in your schema, and I think that particular flow diagram was a wonderful example for student researchers to look at as an example. And also just the setting of your hypothesis. I think the hypotheses were very clear, and we often have some discussion that qualitative researchers don't use the term hypothesis, but in fact we do. We can talk about hypothesis as qualitative researchers. Any reflections on research design, Mondira, that you might share with any of us today?
Well, the thing is that since this work has, this is a research gap that we are talking about. So instead of doing a very large scale research, we begin small. So we like do it in a small area with just a few households, say 100 odd households, and picking it up from this tabulation which we have done. This goes till the village at the village level. So it becomes something very close to the National Institute of Rural Development in Andhra Pradesh, and we begin the work over there with small number of households. And then based on that, we kind of, based on the results, we scale it up.
It's exciting. So I did make a last call for any other questions, and I don't see any hands up or any questions. Any other reflections, Mondira, that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, if anyone is interested in this, and if there is a potential for collaboration, I will be very happy to be part of it, to develop this project further, to be submitted for joint fund or something. That would be great. I mean, I'm absolutely open to suggestions for such kind of proposal drafting.
That's great. And I think this is where Circle can also receive that message and also put that out as a call for collaborators here in Canada who may be interested, including Masters of Science students, Masters of Arts students, or PhD students potentially. And I may have mentioned more in terms of preparing for this seminar that we have had a couple students work with Shastri funding in the past in India on social assistance type projects, and it would be exciting if maybe we could also approach Shastri for some collaboration, Mondira, and these are funding organizations here in Canada that many of our Indian based scholars are familiar with, and there's a huge potential to do sub-studies connected to your larger study. As a postdoctoral researcher, all I can say is congratulations on your work. I'm sure it's going to be interesting and successful way ahead. We would love to have you back again at some point. And I think without further ado, I'm just going to thank you very much for a wonderful presentation today. And thank you everyone for joining us in your questions.
Thank you.
Lots of applause. Yes. Yes, everyone's coming on camera here. If they like to just say hello and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mondira.
Mondira.